All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our live stream for day one of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. After a long off season, well, long as in 6 weeks, because that's what it really felt like. It is now time for the hurricane season of 2025 already. I know if you are still reeling after the hurricane season of last year, which was incredibly active, you may not be ready for this hurricane season, which is already here. It's already June 1st, but Mother Nature does not care about how we feel. But don't worry, we're going to go over throughout the evening tonight things to know for this hurricane season, things we're watching in the short term, and also what to expect overall for this entire hurricane season, including my very own personal hurricane season forecast. So, without further ado, let's waste no time in getting started. Let's first start off with taking a look at what is going on right now in the tropics, what's happening as we speak right now. And luckily, as we start off the hurricane season, it is nice and quiet. Nothing, as of right now, is expected in the Atlantic over the next 7 days. So if you are worried about tropical activity right now, you shouldn't worry about it climatology wise, and I went over it in my tropical weather outlook video from this morning. Climatology wise, we typically start off the hurricane season quiet. It's not as soon as we get to June, it is off to the races, and we're just full throttle, pedal to the metal activity. We kind of had that last year since we had, a storm like Hurricane Beryl, which was a Category 5 hurricane in the first day of July. But first of all, for one, does not seem like we're going to get that situation this year. And two, it just typically doesn't happen in a normal year. So we're starting off quiet for now, but I'll show you in a little bit. I've been talking about this over the last several weeks as we're now heading into the month of June. We're going to have to start watching the Atlantic more closely, especially in the Western Atlantic, because that is generally where we are typically favored in the hurricane season early on in the year. And there's also model signals. Conditions will generally become more favorable. Lots of people have been talking about an MJO passage, which is basically a period of rising motion in the atmosphere that propagates. And, it's kind of like periods or areas of rising motion in the global atmosphere. And when that happens, conditions are more favorable for tropical activity. And that's what we're going to get in the month of June. And there have been model signals. There's been a lot of talk, especially on social media, of posting model runs, including some very extraneous, like the GFS. If you know what I'm talking about, the whole fiasco that's caused. But in general, we're going to have to watch, especially the Western Atlantic, including the Northwestern Caribbean and Gulf, as we get into the month of June, because now we are in hurricane season. And with that, there's also not just the Atlantic, but the Eastern Pacific too. We just had our first named storm in the Eastern Pacific, Alvin, which literally occurred this past week. And Alvin, of course, dissipated yesterday. Its remnants is probably bringing moisture over northwestern Mexico and the southwestern United States. So if you're in those areas and you like the rain and you want it, you're having it with the leftover moisture of Alvin. But beyond that, it was not really that much of a big deal. And it looks like we might get our next name storm in the Eastern Pacific pretty soon. We have another area of interest, 40% chance. This looks like this could develop close to the Mexican coast. I'm not entirely sure yet what exactly this is going to do. Although, at least from what I see right now, I don't think this should really either be that much of a huge threat to Mexico. But of course, we'll have to watch this either way. Since it's hurricane season, you need to watch the tropics either way. It really doesn't matter. So we'll watch this and see what amounts of this. And you also notice that now, this year, this is one of the new things that the National Hurricane Center is doing for some reason, and I really don't know why they're doing it. To me, it doesn't make sense, but that's just me. But now for the Eastern Pacific map, they're now showing the entire Pacific And I say it doesn't make sense because they still have a separate map for the Central Pacific, but for the Eastern Pacific, they're showing the entire Eastern and Central Pacific maps combined. So I'm like, why are you going to do that? But still keep the Central Pacific. Why can't you just get rid of the Central Pacific since you already have it in one full map? I don't know. Very confusing things that the National Hurricane Center has done here, but we'll probably adjust and get used to it. But for now, one area of interest in the Eastern Pacific. Here's a satellite shot of the Atlantic and a little bit of the Eastern Pacific as well. And you could see quiet, as I've showed you with the National Hurricane Center, not much happening. And you could really see it typical setup in the atmosphere for early on in the season. Lots of dry air out here in the Eastern Atlantic, and I'll show you the Saharan air layer in a little bit. There's definitely a lot of it out here in the Eastern Atlantic, and we typically get that early on in the season. Once again, and I mentioned this before, we really don't look out here in the MDR in the Eastern Atlantic for development this early on in the hurricane season. Why? Because we have stuff like Saharan air, stronger wind shear too. Just atmospherically, conditions are not as favorable, and that's why I always emphasize as we get into the month of June and into the early part of the hurricane season, we really need to watch this area because that's where things are just generally more favorable. And you can see right now in the Eastern Atlantic, it definitely, if you look at this map, you would definitely see it just does not look like anything is going to happen. And of course, none of the models indicate anything will really happen at all over the next several days, or at least in the foreseeable future. And I'll show you here on the map. This is the ocean analysis from NOAA. And you could also see not much in the way of activity. But I like to show this map because it shows the indications for where there are tropical wave axes. And you can see there's one out here in the Eastern Atlantic, and you want to pinpoint that on where it actually is on the satellite. It's probably this feature right in here. And keep in mind, tropical waves too, that at least, well, two things. One, they do bring impacts and they do bring, showers and thunderstorms, gusty winds, nuisance weather that you would probably get in a weak tropical storm, especially for the islands. And two, and we definitely saw a lot of this last year. Even if tropical waves, we might have some weak waves out here in the Eastern Atlantic. But that does not mean if they don't develop out here, and they're weak out here, they're all convection-less, that does not mean they will not develop at all. And we especially saw a lot of it last year. Two of our biggest hurricane impacts in the United States, Hurricane Helene and Milton, both occurred last year and formed in the Western Atlantic, in the Northwestern Caribbean and the Gulf. Both of them. None of them formed out here in the Eastern Atlantic. It's been a few years now since we've gotten a storm to form in the Eastern Atlantic and track all the way, well, maybe Beryl, but what I'm trying to say, a typical long track storm during the peak of the hurricane season, because Beryl was in late June and July, which is very unusual, but you get the point. We got to watch these tropical waves, and especially early on in the season, these waves also tend to help find more favorable conditions, as well as, combined with the other setups we have typically, which help favor the Western Atlantic, like the Central American Gyre, and they tend to help contribute to development in the Western Atlantic, even if they don't develop out here in the Eastern Atlantic. So that's my biggest point, which is why I'm bringing up these tropical waves. And really quickly, just to go over conditions in the Atlantic right now, just to further the point why it's quiet. This is the wind shear map from CIMS Tropical Cyclones. This is the University of Wisconsin website. They have a bunch of really good products that I like to use, like sometimes, and I use this a lot throughout the hurricane season, and I'll probably use it very soon, the 850 millibar vorticity map. I love to use it from the University of Wisconsin website. They also have this wind shear map too, and you can see why it is very quiet in the Atlantic right now. Also typical of the early season. Lots of strong upper level winds, wind shear, and that, of course, is unfavorable for development in the Atlantic. So hence why everything is quiet right now. And then the Eastern Pacific, you could see some greens. And coincidentally enough, that's where we have areas of interest in the Pacific right now. So it looks like the Pacific is the most favored area for development right now. But once again, we got to watch to see if something will try to occur over the next a few weeks or so in the Western Atlantic. But for now, not looking good for development in the Atlantic, which is a good thing. And of course, a good thing as we're just starting off the hurricane season. Would definitely not be fun. First day of hurricane season, already something forming. That would just not be all that pleasant, would it? And of course, the Saharan air. We have lots of it throughout the MDR. So in general, it's not really favorable right now. But once again, all typical things that we see early on in the hurricane season. So let's take a look at what to expect over the next few days. Of course, with the help of the model guidance, I'm going to go through both the GFS and the Euro. And I'm just going to take this out into time and let's see if there's anything major that develops. Well, for one, and I've seen a few people talk about this, and I also see a few people in the chat. So if you are just joining right now, you're just tuning into the live stream, hello, welcome. Hope you have a good time. And I'll read your comments in a little bit. Just want to get through the explanation, the presentation I have for now, because I have a lot of things to go over. I'm also going to go over a forecast which I've prepared for this hurricane season, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Let's take it one step at a time. Let's get through the models first. And there's been a lot of, well, not a lot, but some chit chat about maybe having to watch a low pressure to develop this upcoming week over off the southeast coast near the Bahamas. And you can see here, this is the latest GFS around Tuesday afternoon. Some vorticity tries to consolidate, although on this run of the GFS, it moves very quickly into Florida. Actually, it does try to develop a little bit in the Gulf, but maybe does not have enough time to really consolidate. But there is some piece of energy that some models are indicating might try to develop off the southeast coast here. So we'll have to see. And that's also a source sometimes of some of these early season developments we sometimes get. And they tend to be like short spin ups that occur. And, they give us our brief, first or second name storm, but they still happen. And it's something that we get in the early season, and they happen from time to time. Not sure if we really had much of them last year, but especially years that I can remember, like 2020 and 2021, we had a lot of them. So we'll have to see. These could spin up in really short order. Sometime within a span of a few hours, they could literally spin up and become named storms. Thinking of a storm off the top of my head, Tropical Storm Bertha, which occurred in late May, actually, developed really quickly because of warm waters off the Gulf Stream, off the southeast coast. Is like some sort of small low pressure area, I think actually aided by a tropical wave. And I'll show you, sea surface temperature anomalies here off the southeast coast are actually decently warm. So we'll see if this does try to amount to anything. And then really quickly, you could see here in the Eastern Pacific, that is the looks of something try to develop, at least on the GFS, and that is within the next week. So we'll have to see if maybe something does try to form in the Eastern Pacific, because obviously we have our area of interest then. And then let's see what the European shows. Something, again, they actually showed a little bit more bona fide that tries to develop really quickly. And this is roughly around in the 4 to 5 day time frame. This is Thursday into Friday. That actually does look like a pretty interesting little system, at least on the European. And you have two global models indicating some sort of low pressure trying to consolidate. So we'll see. This is a very interesting area for sure. And then as you get into the next week in the Eastern Pacific, once again, you see development of some sort trying to take place. So we might get our next name storm in the Eastern Pacific very soon. And then the talk, of course, is, and I'm going to go back to the GFS really quickly, hour 168. So this is the 7-day time frame in the Western Caribbean. You could also already start to see the makings of something try to get going in the Western Caribbean. Like I've been saying, conditions are going to become more favorable, although this is a little bit tricky because, as you can see, the GFS has something at hour 168 in the Western Caribbean, but if you go to the European, they show absolutely nothing. And as I say, especially with these developments early on in the season, especially because this looks like this, if whatever does develop, will probably be from a Central American gyre setup, which is one of the many methods of formation that we tend to get in the early season, especially in the Western Caribbean and Gulf, typically early on in the hurricane season. Central American gyres are very, very tricky to forecast. And it's really not till just a few days before something actually does form is when we start to see model consensus form. So we'll have to, once again, we'll have to watch as we head into the first 2 weeks of June. Looks like something may try to develop. We'll see. The GFS shows it, but the Euro doesn't. And I'll show you, actually, I'll show you the ensembles right now. Kind of see the same thing when it comes to the ensembles. GFS, this is the GEFS ensembles. This is around June 11th. Decided to take it a little bit further out than the 7-day time frame that we typically look at with the operational models here, because the ensembles are generally a better tool to use when you're trying to look long range. And boy, you could see a pretty stout signature of activity as we head into around the June 10th, 11th time frame on the GFS ensembles in the Atlantic. If you were to look at this, and if you were trying to make an inference about what is to come over the next week or so, or, you know, maybe in the near term range, you would look at this and say, maybe we might need to watch something, especially given that this is early to mid-June. Climatology wise, the Western Caribbean, the same areas I'm always talking about that are the most favored this at this time of the hurricane season, the Western Caribbean and the Gulf. And there's a model signal that certainly raises some red flags in your mind of maybe something might develop. But on the other hand, this is the European ensembles, completely different from the GFS ensembles. The Euro, very unenthusiastic. In fact, they pretty much have almost no development. So quite the divergence in forecasts between the two models. We'll see if something does try to develop. That's why I'm saying, once again, we got to watch the next few weeks here in the Atlantic. Looks like something might try to get going. Lots of uncertainty, though, for right now. We'll be on top of it, though, since now we're in hurricane season. And we'll see what happens in the Atlantic very soon. But as for off the southeast, I know I kind of sidetracked. I wanted to show this map first before I went on into showing the ensembles long range to, you know, show of potential activity that we might need to watch in the Caribbean. But I'll show you this map now off the southeast coast. It's very warm. I mean, generally throughout the entire Western Atlantic is very warm, especially here in the Caribbean and Gulf. 29s and even some 30s in sea surface temperatures in the northwestern Caribbean and the southern Gulf, and the entire Gulf as a whole, at least 27 and mostly 28 degrees Celsius readings. So bottom line, if you are looking for development, this definitely is an aiding factor. Very, very warm sea surface temperatures. Check mark for that in terms of conditions or favorable conditions needed for development. So we already have that as one favorable factor going for anything that does try to develop in the Atlantic, but especially off the southeast coast here, it's also very warm. We have some 28s, some 27s. So the shelf waters here off the Carolinas, they're a little bit cooler. but we'll see if something does try to develop. But in general, off the southeast coast, it is also pretty warm, and anything that does try to develop certainly does have sea surface temperatures for the most part to back it up. So we'll see if something also tries to get going here in the next few days off the southeast coast. And then backtracking back to, watching conditions here in the Western Atlantic. This is the velocity potential map. So pretty much the MJO and rising motion in the atmosphere. And the greens and blues here represent rising motion and negative VP anomaly. So rising motion and, more favorable conditions here in the atmosphere. And this is the time frame as we get towards roughly around the first to second week of June, right here in the Western Hemisphere, in generally the Eastern Pacific, Western Caribbean. You notice where we see a bunch of these greens and blues representing rising motion in the atmosphere. So we'll see if this manifests into anything, and if maybe we might be getting our first shot for development here in the Atlantic very, very soon. But it is that time of year, and certainly it does raise flags, of course, that it is getting into early to mid-June. We're talking about conditions in the Western Atlantic, especially the Caribbean and Gulf, becoming more favorable potentially for development. And those are the areas that we typically watch for this time of the hurricane season. So definitely clicks in your mind that we should definitely watch the tropics over the next few weeks. So we'll see if anything does manifest here very shortly. But enough of short-term development talk, because there's really beyond not much we could say specifically, especially not in terms of whether or not a hurricane will hit a specific state as of right now. Not especially what the GFS is showing. Again, it's all a bunch of fantasy things that you really can't pay attention to right now. There's just too much uncertainty in the air. And even with what I'm about to show you now, which is hurricane season forecasting, there's a lot of uncertainty about it, but at least we're covering a much broader aspect of weather rather than trying to get nitty-gritty mesoscale specifics, rather than, if we're trying to predict a certain pattern over a course of several months. That is generally, I guess, the uncertainty is a little bit more acceptable. So that's what we're going to do now with my hurricane season forecast. I always do this every single June. I release a hurricane forecast for what my personal predictions are in the Atlantic and the Pacific. I also do them in April, but I decided not to do it this year. But I just so decided I had to do it in June, no matter what this year. So here it is. My personal predictions for this year's hurricane season are, as you can see on the map, in the Atlantic Basin, I expect 15 to 19 named storms, 7 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. My ACE generally falls accumulated cyclone energy. I'm generally calling for an above normal season anywhere between 140 to 180 ACE points. And in terms of United States landfalls, this definitely a lot more uncertainty. Can't really pinpoint it down exactly, but sometimes you can generally get an idea of what to expect. I'm predicting 4 to 7 United States landfalls or United States impacts this year. So you look at these numbers and you think you expect an above normal season, and the answer is yes, I do expect an above normal season this hurricane season. I think there is the potential that maybe we might have a slight overperformance this year compared to what the expectations are, at least by a lot of people. Some are like, maybe we'll have to watch this season. Some are giving this hurricane season a chance, but I would definitely say I'm probably on the higher end of what most of the other hurricane season forecasts are. And not only do I have a number forecast, I also like to do an impact forecast as well. So I like to go over the numbers I'm expecting and the impacts I generally expect for this year, and what are my top spots for this hurricane season. Probably, in my opinion, the Gulf of Mexico once again. And if you've been following me over the last several weeks and months, I've been talking about the Gulf, the Western Atlantic, especially over the last week or so. The Gulf of Mexico has really warmed up quite a bit. So there's definitely a very high level of threat for a pretty significant impact in the Gulf this year. If there's any specific place you would ask me in the Gulf, and I know there's a lot of uncertainty behind this, but my personal interest this year, really, really wonder what some of you guys think, but my personal interest this year, is in Texas. And the reason why I say that is some of the analogs that I've looked at for this season, some of the analogs people tend to throw around for this hurricane season, some including years like 1996, 1999, 2017, 2008, all years that came after a first year La Nina. All of those years had a hurricane landfall in Texas, and we did have a hurricane landfall last year with Beryl in Texas, but it's been some time since we've gotten a major hurricane landfall in Texas, especially around the Galveston area. It's been many, many years since we've gotten a major hurricane landfall in and around the Galveston and Houston area. So I am very, very wary about Texas this year, and that's probably one of my biggest areas that I'm concerned about, especially along the Gulf Coast, but in general, the entire northern Gulf, especially the United States Gulf Coast. I am very, very enthusiastic. Well, enthusiastic, obviously not in a good way because we're talking about impacts, right? But I'm very confident in the northern Gulf Coast, potentially the western Florida areas. I know western Florida has been battered a lot over the last several years, including the northern Gulf. And unfortunately, I think you guys are at a very high threat level for this year once again. But besides the Gulf, because obviously we're not going to have activity just in the Gulf, I've looked at other forecasts for this year, other people that have been predicting impacts for this hurricane season, and a lot of people really are putting emphasis on potentially the Northern Caribbean and the Bahamas. And if you look at a lot of the hurricane forecasts, or if you look, not forecasts, analogs, I'm sorry, for this year. Oh, I don't want to do that. A lot of the analogs for this year kind of have lots of activity in the Northern Caribbean and in the Bahamas. And you would think that, oh, since I have a lot of activity and a very high threat level for the Bahamas, would I also have a high threat level for the east coast of Florida? And for that, I say there is too much uncertainty for that, especially given that we've not had a hurricane landfall, or especially a major hurricane landfall um, on the east coast of Florida in quite a few years. I think it's been since '04 or at least '05 that we've had a major hurricane landfall along the east coast of Florida. I mean, we did have Hurricane Nicole a few years ago, but that was only a weak hurricane. So I'm just too uncertain about the east coast of Florida to give it a super high chance. But the Carolinas, they've not gotten some very significant impacts in a while. They would get a few impacts here and there, but I also think the Carolina coast, especially North Carolina, does have a chance to see at least some impacts this year. So I'm very confident on that, including in general the entire Northern Caribbean islands. I've seen quite a bit of years. Again, the same analogs that I've talked about before, years like 1996, 1999, 2017, 2008, all of them had pretty active seasons for the Northern Caribbean. And even a year like 2011, we had Hurricane Irene. That impacted the Northern Islands, was a major hurricane near the Bahamas, and then obviously made landfall in the Outer Banks of the Carolinas, North Carolina specifically, and then impacted the Northeast, which is also another area I'm kind of worried about for this year. And then beyond that, Atlantic Canada, they've also been getting lots of impacts recently. So we'll see if we do get any impacts there. But generally, given the trend over the last several years, we'll probably get an impact in Atlantic Canada. So I'm also worried about that, and Bermuda as well. We tend to get a lot of these recurving systems, especially over the last several years, that have brought impacts to Bermuda. So I have elevated risks for all of those areas. But my top areas, once again, the Gulf, especially around Texas, the northern Caribbean, Bahamas, and off the Carolinas coast are my top areas for impacts this year. So we'll see. Do they pan out? We'll see over the next 183 days. In the Pacific, because I also do Pacific hurricane forecasts, I'm expecting a near to maybe slightly below normal season there. 13 to 17 named storms, 6 to 9 hurricanes, 3 to 5 major hurricanes. And you would think that is generally an active season or an active-ish season. Well, for Pacific standards, that's not. For Atlantic standards, this is actually, would generally be considered not a bad hurricane season, or at least slightly above normal. But in the Pacific, this is generally right around normal to slightly below normal, maybe slightly above. But this is not really a very, very active hurricane forecast for the Pacific. And I also have an ACE of 130 to 160. Really not looking at a big Pacific hurricane season for this year. And as you know by the forecasts by now, not really big on El Nino. So that kind of already takes a few points off the Pacific. But also not big on La Nina. It's really that the Northern Pacific associated with the PDO is very, very cold this year. And as we're now heading into hurricane season, it's especially very, very cold. And it's kind of seeping into the tropics. I'll go over it in a little bit and I'll kind of explain my thought process in a moment. But in general, it's not very favorable for a super active hurricane season in the Pacific. So that's why I generally have this forecast. And because of that, in terms of impacts, I also generally think, impacts wise, I would say, in my opinion, the biggest areas, and this is generally, where we see in most years, Mexico probably going to be the biggest areas for this year, especially because I would assume, since the Pacific is in general not very favorable, and there's a lot of colder anomalies here, especially to the north and west, I think we'll probably have a lot of development closer to Mexico, and especially as we get later on in the season. I mean, we kind of already saw it with Alvin. I think the trend will continue. We'll see a few recurve storms that recurve back into Mexico, and especially maybe near the Baja Peninsula, and impact the Baja, Manzanillo, Acapulco, which was hit really hard by Otis. And then there's another area in here that I forgot the name of, but I think it's another major city along the western Mexican coastline. Don't remember it right now, but in general, those areas are the areas where I expect highest impacts. And given that I expect most development to generally be closer to Mexico this year, I don't see much in the way of potential impacts for Hawaii, really at all. I mean, most years Hawaii, there's this weird shield. It's kind of like Eastern Florida. There's this shield of activity where just we don't get impacts. Especially over the last several years in Florida. It's the same thing for Hawaii, although it's been pretty much always the case. We just don't get impacts to Hawaii, and I'm generally not big on impacts for them this year. So that is it for my hurricane forecasts for June. Let me know what you guys all think. What do you think of what my forecasts were for this year? And if you've not caught them, I will post them later on Twitter and on the YouTube community, so you could review at a later date. And obviously, once this live stream ends, you could go back and review and see what my forecasts were if you missed them. But I'm going to go over what is my thought process behind why I expect what I expect for this hurricane season. And I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but it really all comes down to the way things look with the sea surface temperature anomalies. This is the latest sea surface temperature anomaly map from NOAA Coral Reef Watch. We always go over this every single week. And I mean, we've been going over this every single week. The map in the Western Atlantic, very, very warm. Generally throughout the Eastern Tropical Atlantic, either right where it should be to slightly above normal. A little bit of cold here in the Eastern Atlantic, but I'm not really all that concerned about this because I do believe it'll probably warm up as we go through the season, as we head into the season, especially by the time we get to the peak, but especially here in the Western Atlantic. I've mentioned it before earlier on. We'll see. We've tended to have this thing over the last several years where storms, when they don't develop out here, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream, when waves don't develop out here in the Eastern MDR, that they can sometimes develop further west. And those have been our most impactful, damaging major hurricane landfalls. Last year, both Milton and Helene formed in the Caribbean and Gulf. None of them originated, at least in terms of formations, from the MDR. Well, Beryl did, and made landfall as a hurricane in Texas. But in terms of both of our major hurricane landfalls last year, both of them didn't develop in the MDR. But I do think there will be some development in the MDR as we get towards the peak. And that is especially where we'll probably get a lot of activity in play for the Northern Caribbean, which you can see sea surface temperature anomaly wise is very, very, very warm. And that'll probably last as we get into the peak. There's really not that much change occurs once we get to the summer in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies, except for the Eastern Atlantic. That tends to warm up, especially once the African monsoon turns on and gets more active, and the trades as we get into July and August begin to slow down. Then the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Eastern Atlantic tend to warm up quite a bit. And should note as well, notice all this warmth that you see here in the northeastern Atlantic, especially near the Iberian Peninsula. And I don't know what exactly it is, but a lot of times this warmth has a tendency to build up and then slowly make its way south and begin to fill in into the MDR. So we'll see if that happens this year, of course. Compare that to the Pacific once again. I've been talking about it since the beginning of the year. There's really no sign of an El Nino this year. And as I always mention, if you don't have an El Nino, that's it. That's really all that matters with ENSO. La Nina in many ways is kind of just a plus. And I've said this before too. ENSO neutral sometimes our most active seasons and our most impactful seasons in the Atlantic happened in ENSO neutral years. 2005, 2017, both at least during the peak. Later on in the year, as we got towards the winter, we did get into a weak La Nina, which might happen this year. I've seen some talk about that, but especially during the peak, we were in ENSO neutral. We were not in an El Nino. We were not in a La Nina. For some reason, it tends to be when ENSO is neutral. I guess you can't have the extremes of both sides. I guess this is a situation of the extremes of both sides is not always the most favorable. And I guess that's what the situation is with ENSO in the Atlantic. But ENSO neutral and those years as well tend to overperform pretty significantly, which is why I kind of have a little bit of room for potentially the Atlantic to overperform this year. Compare that to the Pacific. My pessimistic forecast is really not driven by the fact that we don't have El Nino or La Nina, but just look at these sea surface temperature anomalies here off the northwestern coast, well, off the southwest coast of the U.S. and off the Baja Peninsula. This really is not a favorable look for the Pacific. This probably represents there's a lot of colder than normal sea surface temperature anomalies and actual sea surface temperatures throughout the Pacific. So we'll probably have a lot less in the way of rising motion in the Pacific, which in turn will probably allow for much more rising motion to concentrate in the Atlantic, especially, just by eyeballing it, you could see um, compare the Atlantic to the Pacific, the Atlantic looks definitely warmer. And I'll show you here Atlantic MDR. This is averaging the Eastern Atlantic and the Caribbean, both of those areas above normal. Compare that to the Nino 3.4 in the Pacific. That is below normal. So obviously the Atlantic wins in terms of who is warmer. So we'll see. But obviously, though, when it does get to the climate models, this is why I guess there's a lot of uncertainty because there's a lot of people that are going a little bit on the, more tame side, on the more, I guess, closer to normal side. And that's kind of the uncertainty that we tend to get in ENSO neutral years. They really swing either way. We've had years where in the Atlantic, in ENSO neutrals, I'm talking about ENSO neutral specifically, which generally seems to be where we will be this year. We've some of our most inactive seasons, especially in recent years, were in ENSO neutral. Take for instance 2013. That was a cool neutral year, and we all know you've probably heard and seen online, especially across the hurricane blogosphere on Twitter and all of those places, all the memes about 2013 being such a dead year. That was during ENSO neutral, while conversely, on the flip side, we had years like 2005, 2017, also during ENSO neutral years generally, and they were very, very active seasons. So this is the CFS for August, September, October. I guess this would represent the more tame side of an ENSO neutral for this year. I also think the CFS generally forecasts a little bit warmer of a look in the Pacific, so that might contribute to it. But this generally does not look too active, at least if you're looking at the CFS. But of course, I really think it really depends on how much warming of the sea surface temperatures we get out here in the Eastern Atlantic by the time we get to the peak, which I personally think we'll probably get quite a bit of. And I guess the CANCIPS is definitely much more representative of this because look at how much more active the CANCIPS is compared to the CFS. And I'm pretty sure maybe the CANCIPS has a little bit of a slightly cooler look, maybe closer towards La Nina in the Pacific. So this kind of pretty much perfectly represents my range of activity for this year. Anywhere from near normal, like you see in the CFS, to pretty solidly above normal if you look at the CANCIPS. That's generally where I expect the Atlantic to end up this year. And once again, taking a look at the CFS, yeah, they generally show slightly, maybe a little bit on the warmer side of neutral, but again, actually really more like dead neutral. And you don't have any of these well, you have a few of these ensembles going into El Nino territory, but you also have quite a few ensembles on the flip side going to La Nina. So in general, this kind of just looks like an ENSO neutral year. I think we've got that in stone by now. And then taking a look at the SOI, and this is really just to hammer the point about there being no El Nino. The SOI is in positive territory right now. It did go into negative territory recently over the last several weeks to the past month, but it's since rebounded back into positive territory. And obviously, positive territory with the SOI generally correlates with more cooler, more of a cooler ENSO pattern. So no El Nino this year, and I think that's the biggest. That's good enough for me in determining whether or not we will get in at least a normal to maybe slightly above normal hurricane season. I think the fact that we will have no El Nino and will probably be at ENSO neutral is already good enough. And just really quickly taking a look at all the forecasts, they generally all take that into account. And all the forecasts this year generally within my range of where I'm seeing things either average to pretty decently above normal, especially if you were to look at the Weather Channel forecast, which came out mid-April. This is probably on the more active side, as well as NOAA. They came out with 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10, and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. And they came out with a 60% chance of an above normal season, and that actually shocked me a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought NOAA was going to go with an above normal season, but the fact that they were actually confident on saying 60% chance of an above normal season, that was a little surprising to me. That they are quite confident that this year will be above normal, and I would tend to agree with that. I generally think this year will be decently above normal, with a little bit of a chance that we might see an overperformance, but we also have a chance on the flip side that we'll see an underperformance, and obviously we would hope for that this season underperforms instead of overperforms for the Atlantic, but we'll see. It all comes down to ENSO, and obviously it all comes down to how warm the Atlantic is, and also it comes down to as well kind of these more intra-seasonal factors like dry air and wave breaking, and we've definitely had a lot of that over the last several years, which kind of throw a wrench in a lot of the forecasts, especially last year. Boy, was it tricky to forecast all the dry air, and there were also some other variables that made things pretty crazy for the forecast last year, because everybody expected that last year was going to be such this active record-setting hurricane season, and it was still record-setting in multiple ways, but it still ended up as a hyperactive season. We still had 18 named storms and 11 hurricanes, and that's a lot, but it wasn't a death hurricane season from hell like Joe Bastardi was forecasting all the way from December of 2023. Right out of the gate, he said, hurricane season from hell. No, we didn't have that, but it was still active, and still ended up active. But there was definitely a lot of craziness, especially when we had Beryl in early July. But then we got to August and September and into the peak. It was unusually very, very quiet. So we really have to watch these intra-seasonal factors like dry air. And you get the point. With that, they can really throw a wrench in the forecast and make things very, very complicated. And we'll definitely track them as they come. So, since we got out all the way, I'm going to really quickly read some of your comments and see what you guys are thinking. Definitely have a few comments here. If you are just joining now, once again, hello. Hope you enjoy the live stream and hope you enjoyed what I've shown so far. So let's see what people are saying. Let's see. Alan, hello, Alan. How are you doing? I think people are overreacting to SST patterns that look more normal than 2023, and I guess you are saying 2024. Hence, a lot of people I know have been downcasting. I agree with that. This year, definitely, going back to the sea surface temperature anomaly map, you would generally look at this and say, hey, the Atlantic is, for the most part, at least where it should be, to slightly above normal. Yeah, 2024. I assumed you were saying that. Compared to last year, and I really got to show you compared to last year, let's really quickly show you how crazy it was last year. Let me really quickly bring it up. Compared to this was last year, just off the charts record warmth, and obviously, as I said, um, that obviously led to pretty much everybody saying that last year was going to be a off the charts record setting historic season, and that didn't really pan out. And I think that also too, Alan, might be why a lot of people are pessimistic about this year. I think they're generally they don't want to jump the gun this year, especially because everybody jumped the gun last year. And it didn't quite pan out the way that especially some of the more aggressive forecasts were going. So a lot of people are taking a little bit more of a reserved route, especially because the Atlantic is not off the chart record warm like this. But in general, let's really quickly go back to how it looks this year. This is low. There we go. Still, it's warm. I mean, not much else I could say, and it's probably and again with the Eastern Atlantic, it's probably gonna warm up, especially as we get towards the peak. Generally because early on in the season, trades tend to be a little bit stronger, but especially, and this has also been something we've had over the last several years. Once we get to August and September, and even starting around late July, once the African monsoon really begins to strengthen and allows for the trades in the MDR to significantly weaken, the sea surface temperatures out here really begin to warm up significantly. So I'm not really worried about the warmth overall in the Atlantic. Once again, as long as we don't have an El Nino, I think that's already a plus for the Atlantic. So yeah, there's that. Um, and yeah, Alan, you said that literally nothing to suggest that because we've seen worse patterns give us above average seasons before. Yeah, exactly. Which is why I'm generally thinking that this year will be an above normal season. Brandon Dunn, I think 2025 underperforms. Maybe, and you would generally hope that that's what ends up happening, obviously, because you don't want lots of activity. And again, there's a lot of uncertainty with ENSO neutral years. Really lots of extremes that tend to happen in ENSO neutral years. As I said before, some of our most inactive seasons and some of our most active seasons both happened in ENSO neutral. So lots can happen this year, that's for sure. We're probably not going to get the most extreme version, generally given that, especially compared to last year, we're not on the most extreme end of things. Definitely, I mean, just let me see if I could really quickly go back to what the anomaly was last year. Here it is. We're definitely not like this. So I would think that we're probably not going to get the extreme levels of activity like what you would think this map would have produced last year, but ended up not. Whatever. But again, still think it's probably going to be above normal unless something extreme does happen. We'll see though. All right, let's see. Let's see what other people are saying. Chris says East Coast impacts this year. Miami at a medium chance. Let's really quickly go back to my forecast here. So yeah, I do expect there will be some East Coast impacts, especially off the Carolinas, like off Cape Hatteras and off the Outer Banks. Miami and the East Coast of Florida, however, on the other hand, we'll see. Not very certain right now because, again, over the last several years, there really just seems to be this shield of just we cannot get a major impact to occur um, in the East Coast or along the East Coast of Florida. And I guess that's because we've been getting most of our activity to occur in the Gulf, anyways. I mean, take for instance, last year with Milton and Helene, both of them formed in the Western Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico. So the only places that would really have to impact in Florida was along the West Coast. And I do think we'll probably get a lot of that this year as well. But once again, looking back at the analog years, there really seems to be a precedence in years compared to this year, like 2017, 1999, 1996, 2008, even 2011. There's a precedence for lots of activity in the Northern Caribbean and in the Bahamas. So still giving that chance that the eastern coast of Florida might have to watch out. We'll see though. We'll see how everything ends up panning out. So let's see. Does anybody else have any other forecasts? Oh, I see Brandon Dunn posted his forecast in the chat. And if you want to post your forecast in the chat, feel free to do so. And if you want me to read it out, I could. Brandon Dunn, his forecast, he says 13 to 15 named storms, 6 to 7 hurricanes, 2 to 3 major hurricanes, 105 ACE, and 3 to 4 U.S. landfalls. So I guess, falls in line with maybe a more average season. I would definitely understand that. And by the way, when was the last major hurricane landfall in Texas? It was Harvey, you're right, but I'm more specifically thinking about major hurricane landfall near the Galveston, Houston area, because that's, the biggest area of activity, or the biggest, most populated area of Texas. And the Galveston, Houston area, we've had a few close calls over the last several years. I mean, you remember Hurricane Laura back in the, 2020, several years ago. Hard to believe, wow. 2020 already, 5 years ago. Boy, does time fly. But obviously Laura was a close call. But the last time we had a major, not a hurricane landfall, a major hurricane landfall in the Galveston, Houston area was, I think, Hurricane Alice of 1983. So it's been a while since we've gotten a major hurricane impact there. We came very close with Hurricane Ike of 2008, which, funny enough, is a analog that I'm interested in for this year, and also an analog that people are generally throwing around for this year. So we'll see. My focus once again really is on Texas. We'll see if that pans out. I could be wrong. Hopefully I am. But once again, my biggest area, one of my most concerned areas for this year, is Texas. And generally, because there's a lot of people that live in Texas, especially in the Galveston, Houston area. And if we get a major hurricane landfall to go through Galveston, Houston. Last time we got it, the Galveston, Houston area was always a populated area, but especially today, lots of people moving to Texas now, and lots of people moving to Florida too. Lots of people moved to Miami, and Miami hasn't gotten a major hurricane landfall in decades as well. They got hurricane landfalls in 04 and 05, but not even those years. We got a major hurricane landfall specifically in Miami. And boy, since then, have a lot of people moved to Florida, especially Miami. So it really is a big risk. And there's definitely a lot of people and, a lot of concerns to be had about those areas. We'll see if they generally, we'll see if they end up in the line of fire this year, especially Galveston, Houston, my biggest areas I'm concerned about for this year. But, let's see, Alan, his forecast, he posted in the chat. He says 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 majors with 145 ACE. I guess, yeah, maybe. And Brandon says this year marks 40 years since Hurricane Gloria. Yeah, 1985. 1985 was also a very active year for impacts in the United States. I think we had 6 hurricane landfalls that year, so that was an active year. But if nobody else has any thoughts, I think we'll be able to wrap it up for today, June 1st. Can you believe it? Hurricane season is already upon us. If you live in a coastline, I will say this, because it's always better to be prepared, better to be worried. Luck always favors the prepared. If you live along a coastline, and you have not yet gotten a hurricane plan ready, or at least even thought about what you're going to do if a hurricane impacts your area, definitely start thinking about it now. Where we are now in hurricane season. It is now June 1st. So we are now in hurricane season. Hurricane season is now. Obviously, we don't have anything on the horizon, at least in the short term, just yet. But now that we're in hurricane season, that can change very quickly. Even with these, as I mentioned, these short spin ups that sometimes tend to occur, like I talked about earlier, where we might get something off the southeast coast this upcoming week that we might need to watch to see maybe sneak attack. Those two, those quick spin ups, they're only tropical storms, but they're still storms. They still bring impacts. They still bring heavy rain, gusty winds, and those could still have impacts to life and property, and could still take someone's life. And sure, it might be that one person, but you don't know if that one person is you. So it's always good to be prepared. Once again, luck favors the prepared. And it's better to be prepared, but then come 2 or 3 days before a major hurricane landfall bearing down on your area, and you have absolutely no idea what to do. And I know that's going to happen a lot this hurricane season, as I said, because a lot of people, especially, have moved to big cities along the coast, like Houston, Galveston, and especially Miami and Florida. Lots of people have been moving down to those areas over the last several years. Areas that, well, we've had a lot of hurricane impacts in Florida and along the Gulf Coast, but specifically major, cities like Houston and Miami. Again, they've gone many, many years without direct major hurricane landfall, and it's only a matter of time. It's a ticking time bomb before we get major impacts in those areas. So we'll see when it happens. Hopefully, it doesn't happen this year, but it's only a matter of time before it does. And you got to be prepared for when it does happen. That's I think that's going to be my model for this year, honestly. Luck always favors the prepared. Always remember that. Maybe I should make a t-shirt out of it to really hammer that point home. So, with that being said, one day down of hurricane season 2025. We have, what is it, 182 more days to go. And one day down, and I'm pretty sure all of us survived. So that's a good thing. But with that being said, not really much else to go over for tonight's live stream. I'm going to stay on for about a minute longer if you have any other thoughts, and I'll read them out loud. But I think I'm getting ready to close it up here. So once again, 182 more days to go. Let's see where the card takes us over the next 182 days. Fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the ride, because trust me when I tell you, it's going to get bumpy. Even if the forecasts are not particularly big on this year, you never know. The Atlantic is always going to throw surprises at us, and the Atlantic is notorious for throwing surprises at us. So we'll see what happens for this hurricane season. But with that being said, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy what you saw today, if you enjoyed this live stream, I really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends, share with other people that you think might find this type of content interesting. I really, really, really recommend it. And turned on, and if you subscribe, make sure to turn on the notification bell, so you can get whenever I upload videos and whenever I do live streams. The moment I go live, if you have the notification bell on, you will get the notification for the moment I go live. And trust me, we're going to be doing a lot of live streams throughout this hurricane season, especially when there are major hurricanes occurring. If there are major hurricanes occurring and they're impacting major areas, or in general, if they're impacting land, you bet you should expect me to be going live. So if you want to stay tuned for that, again, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. We're going to be doing a lot more of these throughout the hurricane season. Just you wait. And we're going to be doing daily tropical weather outlooks from here on out. I've already been starting that this past week. So stay tuned for that as well if you are new to my channel. And if you also want daily tropical weather outlooks on what's going on in the tropics, I also do that. And we're going to be doing that from now all the way up until the end of hurricane season. So expect 182 more days of me and this channel and tropical weather outlooks. And I do very much look forward to enjoying that ride with you. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And let's see what this hurricane season brings for us this year. Stay safe. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I will talk with you again very, very soon. Good night.